And we are live today. Welcome everybody back to MissionTop. MissionTop is a place, it's a farmstead and ranch, it's a family, our family. It's a place of ideas, it's a process, it's a way of life. And today on this live stream, I am very pleased and happy that my wife, Sara, has chosen to join me. My name is Nuila. And today, as opposed to most of these live streams, which have been me basically trying to articulate some idea for an extended period of time, I'm very much looking to this, which is forward to this, which is just a conversation with my wife Sara to give you a bit of a glimpse of the MissionTop project from her point of view, and that's an important point of view, right? But we've kind of gone back and forth, how much we should bring Sara into this. Not that she doesn't have a lot to contribute and not that a lot of people aren't interested, but whenever you're doing something where you start kind of sharing more things with the world, there's of course some prudence, some wisdom in not bringing out everything, right? There's kind of a public side of life and there's a more private side of life, and there's good reason to maintain those kinds of things. And of course, I've been kind of embodying the more public side of things, making these videos, talking about things. And Sara has been more embodying more of that private side of life. And so we've debated on, is how much to bring Sara into this. But for sure, we want to do it at least to some degree, and when Sara wants to, because, as opposed to me maybe that kind of is all about these ideas and wants to get them out, it's maybe not her first inclination to even want to come on to something like this. And so we've had to, I've had to make several invitations in order to get her on here. And finally she has accepted. So I am happy to have her on here and make a proper introduction, because this is all going to be about me interviewing Sara and getting her take on all of this, because inevitably when we're talking to people and explaining what MissionTop is and this and that, of course I can talk about all the ideas, and me, I could get going forever if people wanted that. But very often, people are stopping and saying, now Sara, what do you think about this? And what is your day like in this? And so I think it's very important that this aspect of things comes out. And so one thing you can do to help us as we're letting Sara talk and get into the intro and everything like that, I would appreciate it if you'd put in your comments on here, or questions especially, because we would love to answer them and get into those. And with that all said, I think we'll give official welcome. Welcome,
Thank
Sara.
you. I am happy to be here.
Yeah.
Happy to help you out.
And I'm trying to kind of set the expectations so that they can be exceeded, right? And that's another thing I should say is, we have not rehearsed this. I have not even given the questions that I'm going to ask to Sara. So there's a very real possibility that this could all crash and burn, because this is all our first opportunity or first chance of doing this. So please don't judge us finally, Sara, or our marriage based off of how this comes out, because it could all go very poorly. But that I'm a big advocate of, you have to get out into the arena and try things and get better at them. So if anything, if it's very bad, we'll only have to go up higher from there. But as usual, enough talking and hearing from me. I'm very much looking forward to just being able to ask the questions today. So with that, I'm going to ask Sara to lead out by giving us just a basic introduction with as much detail as you can manage. Sara, we'd like to hear just your life story, basically, maybe up to the point where we get into more the entrepreneurial life, kind of the things that have already focused on a lot in explaining kind of how we made this happen, but especially that point out of law school. If you can bring us up from your perspective and your life up to that point.
Well, first I'll say I really like to kind of hide behind your thoughts. Like, I enjoy listening to Gary and hearing what he has to say, because I think he does a good job articulating things and has a good way of expressing things clearly. I don't always feel like I do the same, but this is a good challenge for me, because I'm not always forced to have to say everything like Gary does. But basic introduction of my life is just that I have I came from a large family. I have one brother and 5 sisters, and we're all very close. I'm very close to my parents. Born in Utah and was raised in Provo most of my life. Lived a pretty, typical good life. I did piano lessons and went to school, public school, just like regular people around me, and had a few hobbies, things like that here and there. I enjoyed sports, mostly running and tennis. Those were things that were interesting to me. But I never really took off or excelled or even had a real drive to go really far with any of those things, because I always wanted something different. And I knew that what I wanted most of my life was to be a mom and to be married and kind of have that kind of life. Haven't had a lot of other big career ambitions or things like that, although I do think about those things or think about what I would do if I were to have a job and to study and those kinds of things. But for now, I have to say I do feel very blessed because I'm living the life that I'd always hoped to live. So what other basic things?
Well,
you're going to have to help me kind of along.
Yeah, I will help along. So how about you give a little intro of how we met?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So Gary and I met in high school, and I remember the first time I saw him in the halls of our high school, and he was with someone that I had known through tennis. He was a friend, and he, looked back at me and kind of smiled, and it's like, oh, that's different. It's kind of some guy, even though I'd gone to the same schools, we'd been in a lot of the same circles, we'd never really met, which was probably a good thing. I think it was good that we didn't meet until that moment. I was a sophomore, he was a junior at that time. We were just about to end school. And then through that summer, we just had a couple of times we kept seeing each other at church events and just around the city. I just started to notice him more. And he stood out because he had kind of this unique name. Gary was a little bit unusual, and Nuila was definitely unusual as well. My name was Robinson, so my maiden name was Robinson, so that wasn't anything out of the ordinary. But he stuck out, and through the summer, we found out we had a lot of mutual friends together, and then eventually we ended up at the same dance, and he had asked one of my friends to kind of introduce or kind of make a bit of a connection, and she did, and he asked me to dance twice that night, which was huge. For some reason, that was pretty big.
So have you told him how old we were?
So I was 16. And you were 17.
And I would have been 17. Yep.
Which feels so young now.
Yep. That's more. I guess we've been now more half of our lives that we've known each other than that we haven't. So that's a pretty good remark, I guess.
It felt like we were old.
Plus, even more than that.
But we weren't. Mm-hmm. But after that, he asked me out the next day. I think you called me up and asked me out on a date. And our first date was pretty epic. It was awesome because he called me, kind of explaining, "Okay, I want to bring you out." He asked me out, and I said yes. But he said, "Wear something that you can get totally dirty. We're going to go explore an abandoned coal mine, and in that is a cave that has crystals that grow from the top that kind of have formed." And also bring a piece of poetry because we are going to read that poetry in the cave. So that was very different, and it was a little nerve-wracking because
this is with a group, by the way. So
yeah, it was with a big group of people. Yeah, and so my family was actually out of town for when it was supposed to be, but my dad offered to drive me back so I could make it to this date. And he drove me, we were only an hour and a half away, but drove me back just so I could go out with Gary. And we got in the car, he picked me up, and we drove an hour and a half away to this cave. It was totally crazy because it was this ghost town, abandoned mine shaft. It's a small space, you had to crawl in. And then as you're walking through the mine on both sides, sometimes it was just drops, just completely down. And then we got walking for a while. Like you said, we were in a big group of people. So we're walking along. I'm like hoping this is safe, but there are enough people there that I knew and trusted. I didn't know him yet, but I did have to put quite a bit of trust in him.
It shows how much the world has changed, because I think most parents would not let their children go and do something like this today.
And that cave is now, I mean, that mine is totally shut up and no one's even allowed in there anymore, to my knowledge. But then we got walking, and then they said, okay, we're here to the cave. And all the guys had to help the girls you looked up and there was a hole in the ceiling or in the top, and they helped us all climb up into it. And then it was this really cool big room that everyone was able to get around and comfortable in. And then Gary had made a lunch, and everyone had made a lunch for their date, and we had our lunch, and then we read poetry, and we did
Dead Poets Society.
Yeah,
that's where we got the idea, basically. So if any of you have seen that movie, it was big there in the 90s. This was 1999. And so, yeah, that was our idea of being romantic, was taking these girls and reading them poetry in a cave, and candles and everything.
It was, for sure. But I think most people didn't take it exactly as seriously as that. But it was very fun. It was very cool. It was definitely an experience to remember. And then on the way home, we finished lunch, everything. We got out, got back in the car, and my initial conception of Gary was that he was a really cool guy, confident. He was involved in so many things, journalism and soccer. He was out there. People knew him. And even though I hadn't really seen him, I started to catch on to all the things he was involved with going into this. This was right before his senior year, my junior year. And some of his friends that he'd been friends with before, I'd kind of known, but they weren't exactly the kind of guys I would want to date. They didn't have that kind of appeal to me exactly.
Good reputations, let's say.
It's true. So on the way home, everyone in the car fell asleep, and Gary was driving. And
everybody was totally wasted. It was a pretty grueling hike.
It was hot too.
Yeah, everybody.
There were a lot of things about that hike.
This was in an old Ford minivan that, for those of you from Europe, is one of these smaller vans, kind of a typical size van actually for Europe. And so I'd had that, but it looked like a dust buster. If any of you have seen those machines from the 80s, the vacuums, that's what it looked like. So pretty ugly beast of a mobile, but at least it fit everybody. And yeah, everybody falls asleep in the back, and there we are in the front.
But we had such a good time talking, and I was able to just sit and talk to you, and you listened, and then you had tons of questions for me, and I felt like this very sincere, genuine interest of wanting to know me and who I was. And that was new and different to me from a lot of the guys I dated, or been out with on dates rather. And we had a great time. That was so cool. But at the end of the day, I'm going to try not to take this out too long, because I could talk about this for so long, because we had some good times. But at the end of the day, every guy had a little prize. What would you call it?
Did we? I don't even remember this.
Yes, you do, because it was a thing of bubbles.
Okay.
But I can't quite remember if I deliberately left it in your car to see what you do if I'd left it there, or if I genuinely forgot it. But that was what got you back. Was it it was on Sunday you came over and visited me, because I'd left this thing in your car, and Gary just came in, and he had this like bright soccer jersey on, and had these duct taped funky, what are those shoes called?
The sandals, kind of the ones that soccer players wear, the Adidas ones that soccer players wear.
That was kind of like the initial thing that was kind of the initial thing that got us together.
Yeah.
So.
And one thing she didn't tell you is that right as I was dropping her off on that date, so like in our religious tradition, it's kind of frowned upon with most of the youth, at least those that go to the church and stuff, to swear, to have curse words and things like that.
Yes.
So I wasn't a person that generally used that or whatnot, but I was trying to be on especially good behavior, trying to make a good impression. But as I'm driving her home, I was making this turn off of the road and almost killed us with an oncoming car, and out came some curse word. And I knew Sara was not the kind of girl that would say that. So I thought I'd kind of blown everything up just right then. And that was right before I dropped her off. So anyway, that was my remembrance of the ending of the date.
Yeah, I do remember that.
Luckily, everything worked out.
I do remember breaking really fast. Yep. Right then.
But yeah, that's a good, little intro to just kind of us and meeting us. But back to your life and focusing on you, give us a little bit of from that point, take us up until even through law school, and just kind of give us a brief intro to that.
Like briefly, because that's hard.
Yeah, and I should say at a later point, we want to do kind of our whole story, our whole romance, not because we think it's some like thing that people would actually be interested in. That's kind of pretentious.
Right.
But because, in the way that I like to do with any story, I actually think there are some reasonably good principles within there that can be pulled out that are applicable to other people, especially anybody looking to establish like a long-standing relationship with somebody. And so we'll do that at a later time, but yeah, you can kind of take us through a little bit.
Well, so
brief version.
Maybe we need to just
very brief version.
Yeah. So we did, we'll come back to, we did date starting from that point on, and we continued to date. But
I had a whole another year before, and her too, before we were done with our high school, Yeah. So. Yeah.
But I think the thing that makes it easy for me to still talk about my life at this point is that although we were dating, we had a reality that if we were just, clingy girlfriend, boyfriend, things would not work out, especially because Gary was yet to serve a mission for our church, which I knew and hoped that he would do. And so
it's basically a duty, an expectation.
Yeah.
To understand kind of the dynamic of that.
So we always knew we'd have to face that. So we knew we had to create a kind of relationship with each other that would make it so it could last through something like that, which meant that we needed to still maintain semi-normal lives without each other. So although we did date, and we'll get into that, I just continued on with school and ended up graduating, and I was disappointed when I graduated high school because I didn't get into the college that I wanted to get into. I wanted to go to BYU, but I had not achieved the scores.
Brigham Young University, which was in our town, and it's the university that a lot of people from our church go to. It's like in our church there's a few different church-sponsored universities, and this one's the best one. So generally, it's the one that most members of our faith want to go to, just because it's a great opportunity to be amongst other people in your same kind of worldview, I guess you could say. College, being a place that maybe some do, plenty go to other places and want to introduce themselves into the broader worldview, but a lot want to kind of stay within a social circle of people within that worldview. So anyway.
And it is a good school for the price, which I wanted that. So I was really disappointed. I was humbled. Gary had already left on his mission when I'd found that out. So I was embarrassed, writing that I hadn't made it in there. So I went to a local school, the little just community college, for the first 2 years of college, which for me was actually a very good thing because that was probably the first time in my life I really learned how to learn. I was able to get really good grades there because I had so many more opportunities, because I did take college seriously. I went to my classes, I attended them, I sat on the front row, I took it seriously. So it was a good experience for me because I learned a lot. And at one point, the semester before Gary got home from his mission, I was taking 21 credits, and I was able to do it well. And I was even able to get, I think I got a 4.0 that semester. So I was really happy because that was quite different from me growing up. I wasn't necessarily some great student, although I always enjoyed learning or things like that. But
and you got into this university.
Yeah, so then I was able to transfer over to
which is
BYU.
not an easy feat. Most people don't get into this university because there's a lot of competition to get into. So.
Yeah.
And Christian, I see we missed the proposal. So we're not married yet at this point. We had just been boyfriend, girlfriend, and nothing like that. So I'm on my mission. She's now gotten into this university, and now I come home.
But I have to say, one of my favorite things I did in college was I taught piano lessons at one point I had 14 students, and they were all basic piano students. But I do play piano. I'm not an exceptional piano player, but I do enjoy it a lot. But that was one of my favorite jobs I've ever had. I kind of dictated my own schedule. I got paid well, and that was really fun. You kind of got the feelings of growing up. I was, making things happen for myself. So that was a good time for me, and I was glad. And even though it was kind of embarrassing at first to go to that school, later I felt totally different about it, and I do now. That I'm glad I had that experience.
Okay.
So,
and this has all been perfect background on Sara, but now, because I want to make sure we get to kind of,
like I said,
we actually get into MissionTop, which takes a while. That's where, we're going to, maybe in the next portion, kind of just give us the most brief summary so we can get to, because I think, just because I know that a lot of people want to know what's your life like now.
Okay,
right?
So we'll kind of fast forward to bigger decisions. Yes, I decided to marry Gary. Yes, we got married. But pretty soon after we got married, I was surprised at how much I really wanted to start a family. And we were both going to BYU, and it didn't make perfect sense with my program that I was in. I was trying to do elementary school teaching at that point. But I really felt the strong drive. That's what I wanted to have happen. And we felt good about it. So I got pregnant and we started our family.
Yeah, while in school.
And I kept going. And even after our first was born, I still kept going and attending classes. But I got to a point where all of a sudden my progress with that got frustrated because Gary got into law school. And that was clearly the direction that we wanted our family to go, because since I knew that I didn't want to be the provider for our family necessarily, we needed to go with what would help Gary be the provider for our family. So I switched my program to American Studies, and because I could take a lot of online classes with that. And so I started up with that, but then felt the need to have another friend join our family for our firstborn. So I was pregnant again as Gary was getting ready to go to law school, and switched my program. And then we moved to Boston so that Gary could start law school there. And I left BYU and was doing just lots of online classes as I could. But shortly after that you started law school, Robbie was born. And then I had 2 kids to take care of. And as I had 2 kids to take care of, those younger years are kind of intense. And I found that I loved it. I loved the intensity of being a mom. I found it very challenging, but I found it very rewarding. And I also really enjoyed supporting Gary with the things that he was doing, because it was a cool experience to have you be in law school. I felt like I was learning a lot alongside of him.
And I should probably kind of jump in here because, to the ears of a certain kind of person, somebody a little bit more in just normal, kind of what's become traditional culture, not traditional culture, but modern culture, I guess you could say. Like, to some people's ears, that would sound like, wait, doesn't she need to do the things that will bring her the status and the success in the world that she wants? But what you have to understand about our worldview is that the things like career, like going to law school, things like that, are the secondary things, So I'm doing the less important thing, and she's the one doing, the even closer there to the heart of what we actually have as our primary value, which revolves around having a family, raising these children in a way, having a vision for our family. So, to some people's ears, that might sound like, I don't like the sound of her, for example, she's still 2 classes shy of finishing her degree.
I was getting to that.
Has never finished that. And to a lot of people, they say, well, that doesn't sound right.
But I will finish that.
But, that's, again, the secondary consideration, and it hasn't been this crucial thing based off of what both of us, we both want most out of life. And so that's important to notice, is this story makes sense, and it's a pro-woman story if you understand the value system, right? What we value above other things. And career and money and that kind of success is much more down on the totem pole.
Well, and there's kind of a pressure, like, especially during law school, when people would question what I was doing, or not necessarily question, but just even ask me. Sometimes it's hard to explain that. But what's probably most important is that people realize that this was what I wanted most to have happen in my life, and that I have felt like I have learned so many things. It's not that education or having a degree isn't important to me. It's that there have been other things that have come up along the way. and I still feel confident that I'll finish it when the time feels right, which it hasn't for me yet.
Yeah.
So.
And in a lot of ways, I mean, if you're talking about people influencing the world, impacting the world, if you look in the long term, which of course, the way that we think about things is much more focused on the long term, focusing on making things go right, like within a family, eventually we both believe has a much greater impact on the world than having some sort of high profile job, being a CEO of a company or something like that. The world just isn't, the crucial things of the world are not happening in boardrooms, right? They're happening around dinner tables.
And I do think to also say with that, like, I don't look down on anybody who does choose to have children and still have a career, because
it's totally possible.
That is possible for me, and the way I've done things, it was too conflicting.
Yeah, that's a good point to bring up, because it's not like we're saying this is the way,
no,
this is the only way.
I wouldn't say that at all. I think that people are really able to figure those kinds of things out.
Yeah,
but
and ultimately we're like for the flourishing of women. If we see when you hear men being a provider, if you listen to our videos, it's men kind of opening up the space for women to do whatever they want to do. If it's raising a family and devoting the time and not doing a career, that's great. If it's doing a family and a career but not needing that career to make money for the family, that's great too.
Yeah.
And ultimately, if it's not having children because you for whatever reason, because there's plenty of reasons that's a private decision, that's great too.
I think that people should be able to make their private decisions. I don't want to have anybody feel like this because I do it.
We're preaching here or something.
No, but I do hope that I could be a voice to anybody that does choose to be a stay-at-home mom and raise their children, because it's not exactly the most glamorous lifestyle, and it's hard to explain what you do all day because
it's hidden, it's private.
It's not very fancy or not very sexy or any of that kind of stuff.
But it matters.
Yeah. And I'm grateful that I grew up in a family where I almost feel like raising children has become a bit of a lost art form in some senses, because it's so easy to do things when we see them modeled. And I felt like it was modeled to me, and I was taught the importance of being able to do those kinds of things. So it's always been very fulfilling for me to raise children, and because I can think of how my mom did things or how Gary's mom did things. And, we've had a lot of support system around us, which has made a huge difference.
Okay, so to sum up, we've gotten you here. We're in law school. We got through that. But that's where things really kind of went a non-traditional path as far as what I was doing and stuff. So that's
and it was
where
fun, yeah.
Yeah, that's where I want to kind of We've come out of law school, and instead of me, as I've explained in kind of my story, instead of taking the logical path, because I went to a good law school and you could have gotten the large firm job and made the money immediately, we decided not to do that, and instead go this path of starting something from nothing, an entrepreneurial path, and building this company in the way that I did. So I'd like you, Sara, to talk a little bit about what was that like from your perspective, going from kind of the expectations that everybody had, that you go to this top school and you're going to come out and make money and have this stable, safe life, to going to the exact opposite.
Well, so right at the end of law school, first of all, we went to law school with one child and we left with 3, which was pretty huge, especially for a lot of people that we're with weren't doing that same thing. Although we did have a lot of good friends that were, to put that in there, but that's besides the point. But I was pulled aside by people during the last few months of law school because Gary wanted to start a restaurant, and this was
I don't know
quite
if I mentioned that. That was the first
different.
idea.
I think you did mention that once,
Okay,
actually,
I did.
but that was quite different from my expectation of what we were going to be doing out of law school. I always knew that Gary wasn't going to be a real practicing lawyer, but I did think that there would be a time where he would, as so many people told us, pay his dues and practice law, because that's what you do to get out of debt, and sort of, put some time in there and then move on to something else. So this was very different, that all of a sudden we were not going to put in any of that time, and Gary was going to start a restaurant. So when you say that to someone, it sounds very crazy. And people pulled me aside, and they wanted to make sure that I was okay, because
especially our families.
Well, but more than that, people that I lived by and that saw me a lot, because especially those kinds of people did not understand. I looked like a woman that was juggling a bunch of little kids, and husband was just kind of doing whatever he wanted to. So that was hard to kind of have that confidence in Gary and just say, I'm going to trust you. And Gary will be the first to tell you that I wasn't always like, oh, okay, whatever you want. It was.
Because I had even more crazier ideas than something like a restaurant. So I won't even get into.
That'd be probably good to not get into all that. But they were big expectation changes for me. So that was hard. We moved back to Utah and we lived with my family for a little while because I was really nervous about money. And Gary started working on this restaurant idea as well as studying for the bar, because probably more important for me than even Gary, I really wanted Gary to finish out the law school experience. Yeah. I wanted to know that it would be a possibility that if everything fell apart, you could still practice law.
And just to jump in for international viewers, the bar is just the exam that you have to pass after law school to be able to practice law.
So those were some really crazy, I'm using that word too much because they were really unsettling times. There was not a lot of certainty.
Not a lot of security.
Not a lot of security, and I like security.
Living off of credit cards.
I wasn't going to say that, sorry.
I think I've already said that. So.
We weren't living off of credit cards at that point, actually. I know when we started
we
living
still
off
had some
credit
student
cards.
loan funds.
We had some student loan funds. But then it became the point where it was not, we needed to move our family out and start our own little life because the restaurant thing was kind of crumbling just a bit, putting that together.
Well, I was just, wising up that this was not the wisest thing to do as a first, entrepreneurial venture when you didn't have any restaurant experience.
And Gary's the kind of guy that needs his own house, his own space, and wants to lead out our family strong that way. So we moved into this funny little neighborhood down in a part of our hometown that I never would have seen myself living in. But it was a good experience because you learned that the people that lived down there were great, and they're good people everywhere, even though they don't always seem like the kind of people that you would have been friends with. And we had a lot of good church interaction there. We had places in our church that kept us moving and growing. And at that point, that's when you decided to do the Utah People's Post, which was the community-sourced newspaper. And that was exciting because it was kind of, we'd gone from going from law school. It was kind of it was a discouraging time, although I don't think you'd use that word, but it was hard to sort out what Gary wanted to do. And it's hard as a wife to know how to support that, because sometimes I saw, well, just do this or do that, but those things weren't fitting with what he wanted to do, and I couldn't just say, just go get a job or just go do this. Gary had this drive to really do something independent. So we had to learn.
Something that matched more with my personality, because I knew I could practice law, but I would most likely hate every minute of it.
Yeah. So, but then I know you've told the story about then I just had our fourth child at home. I was planning on going to a birthing center. She had other ideas and she came way too fast. And Gary caught the baby there at home and just left us in that moment of...
Which ends up being not difficult at all.
I did the hard part on that.
Yeah, some guys are claiming I caught the baby. Like, okay, that's not very hard.
But then, finding ourselves just sitting there, I'll never forget that night, sitting there in the living room, holding this baby, wondering, it's weird because there was this feeling that everything was going to be okay because babies just have such a wonderful spirit about them and you feel so good and peaceful. And especially for me, I knew it's what I wanted to be doing, but it wasn't what you had not found what you were doing yet. We were totally at a moment where the Utah People's Post wasn't working out. But then you got that phone call, which ended up extending an invitation for a calling in our church that led Gary to his
to meeting the person that would
business partner.
That would end up being the business partner and kind of make the whole next part of the story come to fruition, basically.
So that was all of a sudden there was this feeling of hope and excitement because Robert has just been such an amazing person to work
that's
with.
The partner.
Oh yeah,
That's
sorry,
the business
Robert
partner.
was his business partner, and also the man that he was working with in this church calling. So it was cool. They were really working together, and Robert's wife Rachel and I just hit it off, and we were very good. We became very good friends. We share very similar life views on raising children and families, and it was just a really hopeful time because things started working out quickly. And Robert brought this whole business and brought lots of clients to make this business start to happen.
The business opportunity and some experience in it and we complemented each other in doing it. And even though this is Sarah's story, just to interject one thing for any of you that have notions of starting a business, I would highly recommend doing it with a business partner. It just keeps this accountability in so many ways and enhances your abilities. However, what I've also learned kind of through the process of doing businesses is that there's nothing more like a marriage than a business partnership, because oftentimes you end up spending more time with this person than even your own family, at least for times of your life. And so, almost the same kind of process has to go in with making sure you're compatible with the business partner and your fundamental values as to what you're aiming for in life. So anyway,
but that's such a good point, because all of a sudden Robert's family was so intertwined with our family that, that was kind of a bit of an overwhelming feeling, I'm sure for them as well, because you realize that all of your decisions affect each other. The vacations you go on affect each other. The way you spend your money affects each other, because you guys still were just starting out, so things were just kind of growing. And
combined a life, basically.
That was very new for me, but it luckily was done with such wonderful people that it came together so well. So that was a very, very good moment of our life, I'd say. And we really weren't living off credit cards for that long. It was just a moment, just to clarify that. But that was not my style, and I don't enjoy that kind of those financial decisions. So it was better when they started making money. So where are we? What am I talking about here?
So we started this business. Finally, there's a viable business. It's small. It's making very little money, but it is making money.
It was making money, and it was like this feeling. But it was more than that. It was like Gary was so happy that just rubs off on the whole family. When your husband's doing something that's providing and kind of what he felt like he should be doing, the whole tone of the house changed, and it was a very hopeful feeling. So things weren't that bad. It was just this feeling that you're like, oh yeah, we kind of lost that feeling of progression. It had been kind of halted for a little while, and it's back. So that was exciting.
Yeah, in those next several years, again, things incrementally progressed. And as we've kind of been talking about on this channel, when you have something you're shooting for, when you're progressing towards it, those end up being the best times of life, right? Especially if it's difficult. If you're progressing through difficulty, then that's when you're in heaven, essentially. That is heaven. That is, that's the essence of life. So it got us into realizing, like, that's the thing we wanted to feel, forever. But so things did go well. I was able to eventually, start generating those passive income, through this, structuring the business so that way. So, I'm going to bring us to the point where now we're looking at the possibility. This is about 7 years after starting that, and things have now gone well, and there is prosperity and things like that. And we've structured this business so that it can continually, supply some income, leaving us more freedom. So now maybe I'll have her talk about that period, because now we had to decide, well, what do you do with that freedom?
Well, so one thing to bring up too, I don't want to sound like I'm just all about the money. I feel like I'm coming off a little bit too much that way, but it does affect the way that you run, and even the way that Gary feels about himself, and the way that our family the opportunities that we can take. But it's weird to be the wife of an entrepreneur, because it's not like we're getting a monthly statement like, okay, this is the money we have,
or a
and
monthly check.
Yeah, this is how we're going to spend it. This is where we're going to move it. So it's weird, because sometimes there'll be like a big chunk of money that comes in. And you're like, okay, we have this chunk of money. We can kind of make up for some things that we've been falling behind on. But then all of a sudden, like, there's this weird feeling like, well, when will that next bit of money come in for us? And it's a little bit nerve-wracking, but it's worked out. But it does take a different perspective on life to be able to see how to function and how to plan and run a household that way, rather than just having a monthly paycheck come in. So then we're at this point where we now have, we had 2 kids while we lived down in that area. I'm trying to just catch myself up.
So then, yeah, maybe like at that point, would I be wrong to say like life for you was pretty good and stable
totally.
in the sense that, okay, money did come in enough.
Yeah, I had the things I wanted. Moved to a different part
of town near family, so there's like,
we moved to this other part of town, which I'd really been hoping to live in. It was the area that I'd grown up in, and I was excited because I felt like I was giving my kids the life that I'd had. I really loved the life that I had, and we were able to, we had our 6th child when we moved into when we bought our first home. And that was really exciting, feeling like we had our own place and could really have it be ours. And then it was around that time that Gary they started to run their business in a way that he was not needed in every daily activity. He had more time at home. He had more time to himself. Sometimes it felt like I wanted him to go back and have some time to go off to the office so that...
Hanging around too much. Things are starting to get boring and annoying me hanging around too
much.
No,
not necessarily. I just wanted that time because especially we have toddlers and we started to have some older kids at that point. Sometimes it's nice to have the house just kind of be able to be crazy and kids be able to do whatever they want. And having a husband in the home is different. Sometimes it's not as easy to be around the chaos and just kind of the everyday ebbing and flowing of the things that are going on in the house, nap times and scheduled, lunch has to happen at this time, kids are crying, things like that. But then it was also interesting as those years went on, we eventually had our 7th kid, and it was especially after we had Kira that Gary seemed to have a lot of time all of a sudden and was home a lot. But it was during that time that Gary really started to focus more on reading and thought and kind of went back to his philosophical training from your undergraduate years at BYU and just spent a lot of time thinking and started making some videos. I think that's when you started making Gladiator and other movie essays.
When those first video essays came out that it has still gotten far more traffic on this channel. Reason why some of you might be here because you were brought in kind of from those initial things.
Yeah, but those years were different for me because whenever I hear Gary say anything like he was bored or he didn't know what to do with his time, I did not have that problem. I had so much going on at home to keep me busy. I was taking care of all these kids.
Well, and to be fair, like I was spending an enormous amount of time like with the boys doing soccer, things like that. So it wasn't me like just locked off in a room doing nothing. And I was there with the family, but at the same time, that can also get annoying too. Like even having too much of a dad or husband hanging around and even participating in the family, it just doesn't work exactly right when it's not directed towards something else. So that's where like let's take it to the next important exciting phase. So we figure out, okay, what are we going to do with this?
So
it's going to get
so kind of got to a point that Gary was like, okay, what are we going to do? And my hope had always been I just really wanted to move to a little bit bigger home because our first home that we bought, it was a nice home in a very nice neighborhood. We loved our neighborhood, but it wasn't the house I dreamed of living in. So it was getting
pretty tight, honestly.
But that's sometimes good with a big family. We were having to deal with each other and rub up against each other all the time. But I was anxious to move on. So my view was, well, let's get like a nicer home in the area. That would be so great. But Gary was thinking something completely different. And I was pregnant with our 8th child. And I was 4 months pregnant. And Gary started to know me well enough that he knew that he couldn't just say something big. He had to kind of ease it on to me. So we're out on a date.
Well, are you getting to MissionTop or are you?
No, I'm talking about going to Europe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because remember, there was the travel easing on that.
He had to learn. He's learned from me that you have to ease big ideas onto me because Gary will think about big ideas all the time and just kind of put them out there. And sometimes I'll get nervous because I'll think, wait, are you going to do that one? Or is that just a thought? Or that's kind of big, kind of thing. So like when he wanted to coach soccer for the high school, I didn't know at first, was he serious about that or was he really going to do it? And then all of a sudden it just happened and came. So, which ended up being a very, very good experience, but was, that was just an example of how he learned to say to me at very good time and give me lots of time to prepare.
You go with littler steps.
So he just said on one of our dates, he said, I would like you to start thinking about what it would be like if our family could go traveling together for a long period of time. And he said, I don't even want you to answer me tonight. I just want you to think about it. And already just the way he brought it up made me so much more open to the idea, because I realized that he was thinking about me and our family. And he gave a few reasons of why he wanted to have that happen. He wanted us to have that experience, which Gary's always wanted our family to have those kinds of experiences since he got to spend a lot of his childhood in Spain, and because their family, he came from a airline pilot family, they were able to travel quite a bit, and those experiences meant a lot to him, and he wanted the same for our family. So there's another principle just to kind of throw out there that as far as things to do with money, because I don't see money as an inherent evil or anything like that, but creating experiences that you will remember is one thing I deem worthy of spending money on. But I wanted, I was at that point thinking, oh, let's buy a beautiful home. And Gary was thinking, that's why you had to ease it into it, because you knew I wanted to buy a home and really settle down kind of thing. So, but then it was amazing, because after him bringing up Europe like that and thinking about it myself and things like that, then I got really excited about it, because I could see what this could be, and that I was totally in there with him. We were totally going to plan this together. And so,
and one other thing to add is that in these ensuing years, I had started taking trips with my children, with Sara, like just kind of solo trips, and we'd already done a whole summer living in Spain, and all those things kind of built the skill, built the possibility of this bigger leap of going for a whole year. So again, these things, all of these big things in our lives kind of came in more preparatory chunks before them, because it is hard to just boom, outright change things. Outright change requires skills that you have to build up to, and we did that even with the travel.
Yeah, well, and I hope I'm coming off the same way. Like, it might be really weird for someone to hear, like, why wouldn't she want to just go travel for a year? But I let's see if I can explain this the right way. I just never wanted our kids to feel entitled or to feel like they were better than someone else, because I had friends growing up that had traveled a lot, and there was sort of an air to them of, oh, we've traveled so much, we're cultured, we've had these experiences.
Well, there's a connotation with luxury, right?
Yeah.
And wealth and the ability to travel. Where travel, that's never how we've approached it at all. It's been experience and meaning and
so I've never wanted
and culture.
I also get afraid, because I don't want people to feel like, I feel like life can give you so many experiences that will help you learn and grow, and you don't necessarily have to travel for that. I see people really get too extreme with their travel and start to just take off and have all these big experiences, but they're really mounting to nothing, really, because you can do travel the wrong way, where it's just
part of it is just to
such a
take
personal this was just so personally fulfilling for myself, but it didn't really do anything to really make them a better person. Those are things that I was concerned with for our children, because I didn't want to pass on that feeling of, you need these big, huge experiences to be a good person, to have a good life, those kinds of things. So that's why I was hesitant about the travel. And Gary knows I've always been hesitant about travel for that reason. And did that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. So then, so anyway, I just remember by the time we went and got our ultrasound and found out we were having our a girl, our 8th child, which would be a girl, I know at that point we decided to travel and make this happen. And I was totally on board and committed. I was nervous about telling other people, because I was afraid that I get nervous about how we come off. I don't want to seem like we're crazy, and
I'm okay with it.
Gary's okay with that. I'm much more sensitive to those kinds of things. So, that was a little bit hard for me to tell people. Also, I just gotten called to work with the children, the younger children in my ward in our church, and I was really
local congregation.
Yeah, in our local congregation, I was really excited about working with them. So that was something I had to kind of be okay with changing, because I wouldn't be able to keep that position. And I really see, because sometimes those kinds of experiences, I feel like make you a better person. So I was trying to weigh out what was more important, but hopefully I'll have more chances to do that other kind of working in our church. But so that was a big decision for me.
Yeah, and real quick, before we jump into the actual, like, what it was like in Europe itself, again, thank you for those that are participating on the chat. You know, we've been looking this whole time, and Christian, I've been seeing your comments. Thanks, Martin, talking about your kind of experiences towards children as a Catholic. And Christian, your wife's experiences interrupting her studies. Although thanks, Steve Miller chimed in there and said that you were very nice and gave a compliment about me being a coach for soccer. These times that's another thing that we could do a whole podcast over. But that was a tremendously formative experience. At that time, I was given more time to the soccer than anything else, even family and work in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
and,
for sure.
And had tremendous experiences. Yeah. Participating kind of in that process of growth of young men, and in the process really experiencing a lot of transformation myself, something like we were talking about yesterday with this kind of agapic process where you're transformed as you open up other people's transformation. So just wanted to recognize those things. And Wiss saying two extremes, says the couple that went out for 1 year. So you got it. It's all relative, right? So anyway, we did get out there in Europe, took a lot of preparation, and then that's what a lot of people get curious about, like what was Sarah's life like living in Europe nonstop? And Christian has mentioned, what was the education of your children like at that time? So
well, wow. I mean, we learned so much. First of all, just getting ready to have, if you want to get into my mind, I was just praying that our baby would come on time, because we were going to be potentially leaving. Our plan was to be leaving with a 2-month-old baby, but it was really important to me that she got vaccinated before we left, and just kind of felt like I had things in order. Like 2 months is kind of the first time I think you should be starting to bring a baby out and doing more. And I wanted to make sure things were set and in order, so we didn't just end up in a situation with a sick baby or, something crazy like that people were like, well, what are you guys doing in the first place? But so I was getting ready for the baby to come, but I was also trying to pack minimalistically for our entire family. And that was hard, but we worked together and we eventually made a spreadsheet on the computer, and was like, kids, these are the things that everybody needs, and these are the suitcases where they need to go into. I mean, it was such a process just getting ready to go, just all of the logistics, and Gary put tons of time into figuring out the travel, our car, and things like that. But for me, I was more trying to think of like, what are the kids going to do on the airplane, and what are we going to do for school? How's this going to look, and how's this going to work? But we definitely worked hand in hand together making those things happen. But it was just different because my mind was so focused on having a newborn and caring for that newborn, and I really didn't want to miss out. Those are such few precious months you get at the beginning there with your baby, and I did not want to have this travel experience take that over. So we really prioritized making sure that I could still be a mom at that point. We weren't just rushing to places and putting our kids' sleep second. Like, we had to make sure that our family was still functioning and running as it should. Yeah, we had to make routines. We had to have homeschool routines, days that we were going out to see things, days we were going in to see things.
Yeah, so maybe tell us about that, kind of how we fell into kind of a routine of how we did homeschool, and then what we did on the other days where we weren't doing homeschool.
Yeah, and this is a whole nother video, and this is something I've actually wanted to do with Gary. This is the one that I was excited about doing, but I'm doing this one instead of you today. But so what we ended up kind of doing was we would have every other day that we'd go out to see things in the area that were important.
Kind of outings, if you will.
Yeah, we called them outing days. And then the other days we had homeschool days. And with the homeschool, Gary's generally, we still do this, where he generally's taken kind of middle school and high school kids and helped them along in their education, and I'm in charge of the younger kids, which has worked very well, I think, because you can kind of make sure things happen. With the older kids, I don't have to worry about.
And there's something very natural about kind of the development of youth, that by the time you get to about middle school, I think there is a good space for kind of a more masculine influence on education. It at least works very naturally for us to kind of divide it that way.
Yeah. And then in our studies, we really focused on, we really went down to bare bones schooling. You know, we were reading, math, writing, and then we would have the kids work on a presentation for, like, so for example, when we were in Spain, we had them researching things in France so that the kids could give presentations on something that would happen in France, so that kids could be aware of some of the places that we were going to see and why it was important. Because when you're bringing little kids around to amazing, historically charged up places, they don't always understand why we're there or what we're doing. So it was really nice, any bit of information that we could get beforehand into our kids' minds of why we were going to see that place. It really worked out well and made our homeschooling so much richer that way. So
one question that's come in from Wiss is to ask you, I think you were mentioning that you wanted these first special months with a newborn, and he's saying what defines those special months of a newborn, and is it until like around 6 months? Is he saying
just slowing down and not forcing your baby to do something that they're not ready to do? That's a huge question, because like for me, it's being able to focus and get the rest I need so that I can take care of the baby and not be a walking zombie all the time, because that's something that so easily happens with a newborn. You're tired, they're unpredictable on their schedule, and some days you can go and you can do everything like before, and then other days you're just tired and you need to sit on the couch or take more naps, or, you know, just do something so that you can just function as a person. Those are the kinds of things that I was hoping to be able to achieve the most, that I didn't feel like, well, we are in Spain, we've got to go see this important thing, where actually today I'm really tired, I need to lay down and rest and, you know, have the family go slower. And then it kind of I feel like with my babies, from 4 months, they start to grow up in a different way. They're not that just totally asleep baby all the time. They're more awake and alert and alive and interactive. So, you know, you kind of start to bring more things back into your schedule that you've let go off for a while. And then 6 months, and then is another huge milestone. And 9 months being probably the one that you're like, whoa, do I have a baby anymore? Because they are now feeling much more like a toddler, or more to that end of a toddler than a baby. So does that answer?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, maybe I'd add in that in those first couple months, you know, you have this thing that's just so utterly helpless and still very much like part of the mother, right? It's not interacting. And so it's those months where, you know, the mother is both tired but also so intertwined, like completely with the baby. And there's
probably can tell you more about that.
And there's this, you know, still this glow to just this, you know, helpless infant, and kind of the only the barest beginnings of consciousness there, that you can just see there's something special there still going on, and the bonding and you know, kind of just slowly emerging consciousness of this baby. Those first special months, you kind of just want to have it be calm. And not trying to accomplish other things. This should be the focus, right?
Yeah. And it gets trickier as you have these older kids that have demands and needs, and then you have this newborn as well, and you're trying to be there for everyone. And that was the biggest thing on my trip. I didn't want to feel like I was getting pulled in so many directions that I just wasn't even alive or there for the experiences that were happening. But we were really able to achieve that. And I have to say, with having an 8th child, it was so different, because I did have much more capable older children to help, that could really help. You know, they were really able to change their baby's diaper. They were really able to watch her if I needed to nap and she was awake at that time. Those kinds of things, they make a big difference. So
I think what we're going to do today is we're going to kind of wrap up at this point. I think this is a good stopping point, and we'll answer the last questions that are coming in and kind of do that as the wrap up. Because I think especially these types of videos on a Friday, where we're kind of trying to have a more just kind of loose feel as we move into the weekend, this means that we can come back maybe next Friday and just pick up right from here, and then, you know, come out of this period of travel, maybe say a few more things about that, but then jump into the MissionTop. So I apologize we didn't get to that.
I feel bad. I didn't even know we were talking so long. I can see why you can talk out here so long.
Yeah, it's not a bad thing at all.
I think
just because I had said we were going to get to that, and we didn't. That's the only reason I say that. But I think this will make a great, then we can give adequate time to actually talking about what Sara's life is like at MissionTop. So so let's wrap this up for today, talking about or just answering your questions. So if you have any last questions on anything we've talked about thus far, or anything that we haven't, feel free to start putting them in there, and we'll answer them as they come in.
I definitely want to talk about homeschool.
Yeah, the first one is did we have a curriculum with says, or did we do it all ourselves?
So one thing we learned big time that I would love to go back and do is we really went to like internet-based schooling, especially with math and with some other Khan Academy courses that are good, but especially for my younger kids, they didn't need to be on the computer all the time. That kind of learning didn't exactly help them become better at learning. Sorry, I said that weird, but I wish we could go back and we did Khan Academy. I would totally do something else now. I have found a math curriculum that I'm using right now that I have loved called Saxon Math. You're going to find people that are so passionate about their homeschooling curriculums, but that one has worked very well for me and for our children, and I feel like it's really given the children some good permanent math memory that they weren't able to get by doing internet-based learning. And then reading, I would do different too. We did a good job at kids got through books, but we started out with Kindles. And by the end of our trip, we even saw that was not a great thing to have the kids have an electronic device in their hand to read from. There's just little kids, especially, they just press the buttons. They can't find where they were last time. There's something about reading into a screen that I feel like it just didn't go into their brain the same way. So we started to just buy more books along the way and read those. And that was really good. And that's what we do now.
Yeah, and just to kind of throw in my 2 cents on the curriculum with homeschooling.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing, this is another thing that I would love to make at least some sort of video on, because I think it preoccupies parents so much, whether it's homeschooling or not, is just to ask, like, especially coming out from high school, even what really is important for a child to have as far as their abilities in their education. Like, is it a certain package of facts and information? And at the end of the day, it's not, right? If your child can read and comprehend, what they're reading in difficult texts, if they can write and express themselves clearly, if they can give, arguments and reasons for what they think, and then if they can have a decent mathematical ability, which usually is only up through, basic algebra even, then they're primed so that they can learn essentially anything. You've given them the skills to now learn whatever they want to learn, whatever they need to learn. So when it comes down to our schooling, that's where you see, like, the curriculum part we'll do with the math, because math is very nice, edges into a curriculum very nicely. Mm-hmm. But the other stuff, essentially what we do with our kids is we have them read texts, and then we talk about them and discuss them as a family, which gets into that kind of back and forth oral, showing that you comprehend something, and then we ask questions and have kids have to answer them, and even get into argument and defend, this, not defend, but,
it's not usually that.
Don't just give me what you think, give me why you think, so we're not like getting into debate per se or thing like that. And then finally writing, to have to put down stuff and writing. And it's funny because, here public schools have all these curriculums, all these classes, and you end up at the end of high school with so many children here in the United States who can't read and comprehend it, who can barely write or not write at all, can't even make a coherent email. And so it's just so funny, the way we get locked into what we think is important as far as a curriculum and what's actually important. So just, 2 cents on that.
Well, and with that, like, I know that Gary, with the older kids, have them do things, but with the younger kids, even if they can just tell me every day what they read, and I'll ask them, just little questions off of that to make sure they're really understanding things, it goes so much further than anything that they were doing at school, I have to say. Just because I know what to ask them. I'm their mom. I understand what they have in their mind and what they maybe need to still get in their mind.
And maybe talk about how we had genuine fears that they'd go back. They'd go back into school after
and
this.
our kids were so worried that they were going to go back to school and be so behind because they were going to miss so many things. They were going to miss their science and their STEAM, all these like little acronyms they make up for these special programs that go into our public schools here. They're afraid they're going to miss so much. And it was they were very happy when they went back to school and they found that they were fine. Like they fit in just fine as if they'd never left.
Because they had enhanced their ability to learn.
Which is what we want most for our kids, to learn how to learn, which is something, that's why I brought that up with my life, because I felt like I hadn't really learned how to learn until I got to that junior college that really taught me how to do it. So that's really important to us.
Okay, so next question. Do you think there's a best period to wait between kids?
That, I don't think that you can put time on that. Our family we were about 2 years between all the kids. Some are just a tiny bit closer. That really worked well for us. I would never go and say to someone that is the best or the only way to do things, nor would I put a number on how many kids you should have. I think those things are so personal and are so, everything has to be taken into account if things are working in your family, other circumstances that come up. But I would say also to not be afraid. Don't let, how do you say it, like things hold you up from having more kids just because you can't see exactly how you're going to afford it exactly. Like you can't be in poverty and destitute and be like, well, we're just going to have another kid. But, as long as things are going reasonably well in your life. Yeah,
there's definitely a faith aspect to,
there's a faith aspect, which I
kind
feel
of
like
stepping
is
into the unknown with children that is inevitable, that you can't be put off either.
I think that one thing that I really love about the spacing of our children is they have friends and they interact with each other so much because there's just not that much space between them.
Yeah, they're friends with each other.
Yeah, they're friends with each other. And I always hoped for a large family. I hoped for it. I knew that might not exactly be the case. It's turned out to be the case, but I wanted to set things up so that could happen, and we were blessed to have that happen. So. Yeah.
And I would say that 2 years, it's not like it's some magic formula, but it is a fairly good age for, leaving it enough space that especially the woman can, recover in the ways that I think she needs to from having a child and have that time. So, but also keep your kids in close enough spacing that this kind of closer friendship is possible. Whereas if they begin too much space between kids, then you get to kids that can't relate to each other as well. But of course, there's exceptions to that, and there's nothing exact about 2 years about that.
Yeah, but also the other thing that was nice is keeping up this 2 year thing. I never got so out of it that I'd gotten rid of all my baby stuff, and it was like starting over. I was totally in the mode of, I'm being a mom, and this is what I'm doing. This is what my schedule's like. I was able to kind of keep it going. So that was something that was really nice for me. I was never out of being a mom and had moved on to something else. I'm like, I'm back to being a mom, which some people say is really hard. So, but like I said, I wouldn't put a numbers or specifics are too dangerous to say in that situation.
Yeah, and I was just chuckling because I was looking at my son Robbie's comment, so we'll get to that. But Christian asks, my wife really finds it hard to talk to people about being a stay-at-home mom.
Absolutely.
She feels that people don't ask about her life the way that they do with other careers, and she thinks they see her work as less valuable. Any similar experiences or advice?
Totally. And I mean, it's one of the big reasons I didn't want to come on today to talk, because it's hard to explain what you're doing, and it's hard to make it sound nice. And I mean, so many people I talk to are doing these big things, and wow, that's so cool. It's like, well, I kind of just kept the kids alive today. That's what I did. But it's hard to kind of help people realize what you're doing every day and why it's important. So especially if they're not doing it, my only advice is just know that, first of all, there's a lot of other people that think the same way you do. And there's a lot of other women that I think would do what you're doing if they felt like they could. I know Gary has made it very possible for me to do this by not having expectations of me providing. And for it takes a lot. I get very busy with the children. He knows that. He doesn't just have his wife with him all the time. And he's been totally understanding about that our whole marriage. And that's been a huge support. Not everyone has that, so.
Yeah, something funny to add in there, especially during the Harvard years there at law school. I was kind of getting tired of everybody. They always ask, "What do you do? What's your wife's career?" And essentially, they're always asking, "What does your wife do for her job?" And so I started answering people. Say I'm in law school, and my wife, she started a center. It's called the Center for the rehabilitation of indigent youths, or not indigent, what was it? Of something to the effect of, I made up this name of the Center for the Rehabilitation of
It's the reforming of.
Yeah.
I can't remember, but it was very clever.
Yes. Trust me, it was very clever.
Funny.
But the funny thing is, people would be like, "Oh, yeah, that's such good work. I'm glad she's involved with that kind of stuff." And I would just, never even break the fact that I was talking about that she was, because of course people would respect that and like, "Oh, you're starting a center for helping turn troubled children into real persons," and how great. But if you just say, "Oh, she's a homemaker," they'd be like,
And
wow.
I'd love to share experiences of people I had, even people that would pull me aside at the library in Boston and be like, "What are you doing? You are having too many children. What are you doing?" Especially by the end when I had 3 children around me. So not everyone's understanding and supportive, which is tough.
Yeah. But I'd say as far as things that I think have been the key to making that possible has been finding a community, because there are still communities out there where this is accepted, and so it's doing your best to find that community. If it's a in-person community, all the better. But of course, if worse comes to worse, there's at least virtual communities where people can support each other.
And we've had such supportive families. We've never had our families say, "What are you doing? Why are you having all these kids?" They've been only excited and helped us out so much. And then our church really supports us as well.
And so I see you guys were talking about that for a while. And Christian says, "I think I'm going to teach my kids how to program." I think that's becoming key as well. And yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that's what's cool about kind of taking responsibility for the education of your children. Even if your children are going to public school, looking at it in this light and saying, what do my children really need? And so, that's awesome that you say, I think that's a skill that they need in today's world, and you make it happen.
And I think the more that you realize that you can't leave your children's education up to a public education system. I know it's harder in the UK to have more flexible homeschool systems. Like when we were traveling through the UK, people were shocked that we were homeschooling our children. I guess that's very difficult to do, but we've fortunately been in situations where it has been easier for us to do it, and it's been so rewarding. But it's also been so nice to feel like we can instill the things that we think are important, pass those on to our children, because when they go to school all day, they do come home kind of tired, and it's not exciting to be like, "Oh, let's jump on this new thing that we want to learn." So making the space for that, though, I think is really important as well, like teaching them something that you think is the most important thing for them to have.
So we finally got to Robbie, where expressing that
right,
it wasn't
Robbie.
exactly fine. Well, from their perspective, maybe it was difficult, but at the same time, as far as like their grades and the feedback from their teachers and things like that, they were.
Yeah, maybe
fine.
We just have a little bit of perspective from that one, Thomas and Robbie, that we know we didn't come back and feel like, "Oh no, we have put our kids in a situation they're not going to be able to get out of." But I think it's also tough because we took Thomas and Robbie during middle school, which is stereotypically a very socially awkward time to make friends and figure out friend groups.
Yeah.
And we took that away from them.
The social was the more difficult.
The social thing was hard because then when they went back, all of a sudden, like especially Robbie had gone from having a pretty tight group from his elementary school, and then they go to the middle school where there's more kids there combined, and it wasn't so clear where his friends were. And people changed a lot during those years. So sorry, though.
I'm surprised. I'm excited to see what Robbie says next, Whis, because I'm waiting for no, everything's horrible. Let us out of here. We're being held here at MissionTop. So anyway, we'll see what Robbie says.
Gary plans on having them on as well. But we know we ask a lot from our kids. We know that they have to think outside of the box and are put in situations that are not the typical, which we as kids kind of crave that kind of normalcy, that base to make sure everything's okay in their life. And we know we took that from them doing these things. But I guess we did it with the knowledge that, with a hope, rather, not a knowledge, with a hope that things would turn out better for them and that they would ultimately someday look back and say, we're so glad we had those experiences instead of just the traditional ones that would have fallen in, because hopefully that will make them a better person.
Yeah, there were trade-offs, but we think the benefits were greater than the negatives on it.
Yeah.
And with that, I think this is a good stopping point. I think no more questions rolling in. I am curious to see what Robbie says next.
Come on,
so
Robbie,
please answer, Robbie. But I think this is about a good enough time for this type of conversation today. There we go, Robbie's saying. But so we're going to sign off, but I think we'll do this next Friday. I believe our schedule should be clear to do that, to have Sara back on, because I think this is a refreshing change from the regular fare.
I don't know, like this is hard, like Gary said before, this is hard for me to do just because I don't want to ever come off like I know something, because I don't, but...
Well, and again, hopefully we've been at least moderately interesting today, and we can get better over time, because that's what so much of our efforts are towards this, is getting comfortable with the process and being more both articulate, asking better questions, trying to hone in to what you guys want to hear about and find interesting, and what seems like you don't find as relevant. So thank you again for your participation through all that, and that helps us to kind of get a feel of what matters to you. And we want to do this ultimately. I've been trying to little by little to prod Thomas and Robbie to eventually make it on here and find the right topic, something that they feel they can talk about and they feel comfortable talking about and whatnot. So we'll see if that ever happens. We're not going to force them to do it, but maybe those of you that have kind of had some communication with them can let them know if you want to see that or not. So this is both Gary and Sara here at MissionTop signing off for today, and we'll see you back next week, hopefully.